Have you ever wondered what happens when you combine intense drama, some magical realism, and one of the most famous stage directions ever, exit, pursued by a bear? If so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing The Winter's Tale by William Shakespeare. Welcome to Spencer's Everything. I'm your host, and today we're taking a look at another one of Shakespeare's comedies, although I must say, we'll quickly find out why it's a little problematic to call it a comedy. It is actually known for being one of the problem plays. It was actually first published in the first folio in 1623, so it is generally credited as being canon. There's not a whole lot of discussion necessarily about who wrote it, but it certainly has an interesting history of its performance and its popularity. Like I said, it was originally classified as a comedy, but modern editors actually categorize it as what we would now call a late romance. We have a couple other plays like that where there is some humorous elements, but there's really a lot of other things in it, hence why it's called a problem play. Not because it has a lot of major, structural problems per se, but just that the tone tends to shift. And we've seen this now in a couple of the late romance plays. That is a hallmark of them in the Shakespearean canon. This one, for example, actually blends some really intense psychological drama in the first three acts with a comedic and somewhat redemptive resolution in the final two. So again, tonally shift, and for that reason we call them problem plays. And also for that reason, it also fell out of favor for quite some time, and it really did not see a whole lot of performance for probably about a century after it was first performed in 1753. David Garrick had a rendition of it called Florizel and Perdita, and then in the 19th century we actually saw a whole nother interest in it as people were more interested particularly in the pastoral elements of the fourth act. That became a favorite. And then in the 20th century we actually see much more embracing the play in its entirety and staying closer to the Shakespearean original. But as you can see, it's had a bit of a journey to get to us in the present. But as usual, let me give you my act by act summary because I think that's pretty important for understanding these plays. In Act 1, we are introduced to Polyxenus, who is the king of Bohemia, and he is actually visiting a friend named King Leontes in Sicily. As Polyxenus prepares to leave, Hermione, Leontes' wife, persuades him to stay a little longer. But of course, Leontes is going to find this a bit disconcerting, and his mind turns dark. And he actually misinterprets Hermione's kindness as evidence of an affair with Polyxenes. And he becomes consumed by jealousy, and so he actually orders his cupbearer Camillo to poison Polyxenes. Instead, Camillo warns Polyxenes, and they flee together, leaving Hermione and her young son Mamillius to face Leontes' growing anger. In Act 2, Leontes' jealousy reaches a fever pitch, and he actually imprisons Hermione, who gives birth to a daughter while in captivity, named Paulina. Hermione's friend tries to intervene and presents the baby to Leontes to appeal to his compassion. Instead, Leontes gets even angrier, in which Paulina wryly comments, "What a fool honesty is." Camilla later adds, "Though I am not naturally honest, I am sometimes so by chance." Those are some of my favorite Shakespeare lines in this play that, of course, is showing the tension between the larger play and, of course, still those elements of humor, even though, like I said, the first few acts are not quite as humorous as you'll find the last two. Speaking of which, in the third act, we will have Hermione put on trial, in which the Oracle of Delphi confirms her innocence, but tragedy is of course going to strike again. Mamillius is going to die of grief, and so Hermione collapses. Paulina announces Hermione's death, leaving Leontes devastated. I'm not entirely sure why, considering how terribly he had treated her, but that is the way of the play. Reflecting on his guilt, Leontes has the famous line in which he says, "It is an heretic that makes the fire, not she which burns in it." Of course, acknowledging not only his own jealousy, but the mistake he had in fervently denouncing his wife, and by pursuing this path of totally unmerited vengeance. And you, of course, as you can see, that when it comes to such witch hunts, it's not the witches that make the fire, but it is the people chasing them. In the fourth act, we are going to jump forward 16 years, and that is going to give us enough time to change the tone of the play a fair amount. Perdita, the abandoned daughter, has actually grown up in Bohemia as a shepherd's child, and she falls in love with Prince Florizel, who is Polyxenes' son. When Polyxenes discovers the relationship, he gets very angry, and he is actually, of course, going to try and prevent them. But despite the obstacles, Florizel and Perdita are going to flee Sicily, and that, of course, is going to set the stage for Act 5. And in Act 5, everything comes full circle. Perdita's true identity is revealed, and Leontes, who is still in mourning over his wife and his children, despite it having been 16 years, and despite the fact that he was the cause of it by and large, he realizes that he has been reunited with his lost daughter. And the play's most iconic moment happens when Paulina unveils a statue of Hermione in which Leontes gives the well-known line, "I do feel it gone, but know not how it went." And then in a astonishing twist, the statue comes to life. Whether it's a miracle or a trick, Hermione returns and the play concludes with forgiveness and redemption. You can see the problems there of the tone not exactly matching up, but which might be a big reason why it did not have universal popularity for, probably 200 years plus. Like I said, the first 100 years or so, there's no real record of it being performed. In the mid-18th century, we do see some renditions of it. It became popular, at least parts of it became popular in the 19th century, in particular the fourth act, the very pastoral elements of it. And then finally, in the 20th century, we do start to see the totality of the play becoming much more popular. This was actually one of Shakespeare's plays that was based off a previous work, which would actually be almost all of his plays. Shakespeare did not write too many completely original plays, but he had a tendency to at least adapt them loosely. In this case, he actually does not change too terribly much. In this play, you can find all sorts of discussions about just how much it is compared to the original work by a man named Robert Greene, and the original work was called Pendesto. It was published in 1588, so just a couple decades before this one would have been written. This may actually, to an extent, explain why there's such a tonal shift, because in Pendesto, even that 16-year jump and this sudden change in the attitudes and the change in the style of the play, that was in the original work of Pendesto. And so maybe that is why this one is going to fall under the problem plays and gives that element that really complicates the nature of this play and how we should feel about it by the end. So who would I say this is for? Well, if you enjoy stories about human flaws, especially succumbing to our jealousy and our inability to understand the damage that we're doing, this could be for you. But also, if you are appreciative of the elements of forgiveness and redemption, then this could also resonate with you. I would say that fans of Shakespeare's more experimental works like Pericles or The Tempest will probably appreciate, at the very least, the surreal and the magical elements that are in here. Going back to that 19th century appeal, it's also a great pick if you love that pastoral romance that you're going to find in Act 4 and just that celebration of the rustic life and the whole young love element of it. Who is it not for? Well, if you are a fan of tightly structured plots or you prefer a single genre when you are reading your Shakespeare plays, then this is probably not going to be for you. I would say that this is probably one of the better known problem plays. So even though it is not the best known of Shakespeare's plays, I do think there is a decent awareness of it in society. So it does have that going for it, since it is a comedy, or more or less. It is also a little shorter and you could get through it much more quickly. I will say that I find the comedies, particularly ones like this, are some of the hardest ones to understand because the wordplay is going to be the most challenging to dissect, especially the humorous parts of it. This one being no exception. But of course, I would love to know what you guys think about The Winter's Tale and how you think it stacks up to other Shakespearean plays, or any other thoughts that you have about this. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.